The sun was beginning to set behind the small village, casting long shadows over the cracked earth and worn-out houses. This village was no ordinary place. It was a place where life had been hard for many years, made even harder by war, poverty, and endless fear. Among the dusty roads and broken rooftops lived a young girl named Amina. She was only 14 years old, but her eyes told a story much older than her years. They were tired and full of pain, like someone who had seen more sadness than happiness. Her thin body showed signs of hunger and exhaustion, as if the world had been weighing heavily on her tiny shoulders for a very long time. Amina used to live with her parents and siblings, laughing and playing in the sun, dreaming of a future where she would be a teacher and help children in her village learn to read and write. But that was before the soldiers came one cold night. The night when her life changed forever. It had been a peaceful evening, the kind of evening when the sky turns pink and orange, and the air feels calm. But suddenly that calm was shattered by the sound of loud trucks rumbling down the dusty road. Men in masks jumped out shouting orders in harsh voices. Their boots stomped on the ground as they ran from house to house. They broke doors, knocked down walls, and dragged people out into the streets. Amina hid under her bed, trembling, so hard that the wooden floor creaked beneath her. She wanted to scream, to cry out for her family, but she was too scared. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it would burst. She heard her mother's voice calling her name, full of fear but also hope. "Amina, come quickly." But before she could move, strong hands grabbed her by the arm. She was pulled out, into the cold night air, blinking in the moonlight. Her parents were nowhere to be seen. No one knew if they were alive or dead. The men forced Amina to get into a truck filled with other frightened children and women. The smell inside was horrible. Sweat, dirt, and fear all mixed together. There was no space to sit, only to stand tightly packed next to strangers. The journey was long and terrifying. They traveled through rough roads, bumping and shaking for hours. No one said a word. Amina's stomach ached from hunger, and her throat was dry. Her body ached from being squeezed in the truck, but worst of all was the feeling of loneliness. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine she was somewhere safe, somewhere her mother's arms could hold her tight again, but she knew it was only a dream. When the truck finally stopped, Amina was led off with the others into a place she would never forget. It was not a market for food or goods, but a market for people. Women and children, broken and scared, were lined up on wooden platforms. The air was filled with shouting, laughter, and the clinking of coins. It was a place where people were bought and sold like objects. Amina's heart froze. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The auctioneer, a man with a cruel smile and gold rings on his fingers, announced each girl as if she were a piece of old furniture. "Strong, obedient, good price," he shouted. Some men in the crowd nodded and made their bids, picking their purchases without a second thought. When it was Amina's turn, the auctioneer looked at her with disgust. She was too small, too weak, too quiet. He said she was a blank page, meaning she had no value. The crowd laughed at her. "She'll be dead before the weekends," one man joked. "No point wasting money on bones," said another. Amina felt invisible. Her dreams, her hopes, her very existence seemed worthless to everyone around her. She stood there, frozen, wishing the earth would open up and swallow her whole. Her hands clenched tightly, and tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. She had been told all her life that she was weak, that she didn't matter, and now everyone agreed. The auctioneer sighed, frustrated that no one would buy the fragile human. He closed his book and started moving on to the next lot, ignoring Amina as if she didn't exist. She was going to be left behind, forgotten, left to fade away in that terrible place. But just as the crowd began to lose interest, the noise of engines interrupted the auction. Everyone turned their heads. A convoy of sleek black vehicles rolled into the dusty marketplace. The men in masks stepped back, confused and wary. From the largest vehicle stepped a woman wearing a flowing robe of deep blue, her posture proud and calm. She looked like she belonged to a different world, a world where power and respect were earned and given, not stolen or demanded by fear. This was Queen Aminatu III, a woman known far and wide as a protector of the weak and a fighter against injustice. She had come to this place unexpectedly, unannounced, and everyone could feel the shift in the air. The crowd fell silent as the queen walked slowly toward the platform where Amina stood. She didn't look away from the fragile girl. Instead, her eyes held kindness and strength, and Amina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The queen raised her hand and declared she would make a bid for Amina. The auctioneer was stunned. "For her?" he asked in disbelief. "She's weak, sickly. No one wants her." But the queen ignored him and named a price much higher than anyone had ever paid before. The crowd gasped. Then slowly, no one dared to challenge her. The queen's presence was like a shield around Amina, protecting her from the cruelty of the world. In that moment, something inside Amina shifted. She was no longer just a fragile girl on an auction block. She was someone important, someone worthy of rescue. She didn't cry aloud, but tears streamed down her face silently. The queen stepped up and gently took her hand, promising safety and a new life. The crowd watched in silence. No one laughed anymore. No one mocked. They knew they had witnessed something rare, a moment when humanity won over greed and cruelty. As the queen led Amina away from the auction, the girl's heart was filled with a small but growing light. A light of hope, courage, and the possibility of a future where she could be free. The moment the queen's convoy arrived at the dusty, cruel marketplace, everything changed. The men who had been loudly bidding and laughing just moments ago suddenly fell silent. The air, thick with the smell of sweat and fear, shifted. People stopped what they were doing and watched with wide eyes as the queen stepped out of her car. She was unlike anyone Amina had ever seen, tall and graceful, wearing deep indigo robes that flowed like water. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a fierce strength, as if she carried the weight of 1,000 battles and had come victorious through them all. The crowd was a mix of surprise, suspicion, and curiosity. Nobody expected a queen to arrive at a place like this, a place where human lives were bought and sold like cattle. It was a dangerous place, full of men who made their living from cruelty and fear. Yet here she was, walking calmly toward the wooden platform where Amina stood, waiting silently to be sold. The queen did not hurry. She did not rush. She moved with purpose, with the slow confidence of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Amina had never imagined that someone like the queen would come for her. She looked at the woman's face, the way her eyes softened as they met hers. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that anyone looked at her and saw her as a person, not just a weak, broken child. For a moment, Amina felt frozen. She could hardly believe what was happening. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. She wanted to scream, to ask why this was happening to her, but the queen's calm presence made her feel safe. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. The queen's guard stayed behind, giving her space to speak directly to the people gathered there. Her voice was quiet but firm. She raised her hand and said she would make a bid for Amina. The auctioneer was stunned, blinking in disbelief. "For her?" he said, laughing nervously. "She's weak. Nobody wants her." But the queen did not answer. Instead, she simply named a price, one far higher than anyone had ever offered for a girl like Amina. The crowd gasped. Some of the men whispered among themselves, unsure if they should challenge the queen. No one dared. That moment was unlike anything the marketplace had ever seen. The queen's bid was not just about money, it was a statement. She was telling everyone present that Amina was not for sale, that her life mattered, that no one had the right to treat her as a thing to be bought or sold. Amina stood still, watching as the queen walked slowly up the steps and gently took her hand. The queen's touch was warm and strong. It felt like a promise, promising safety, care, and a new beginning. The crowd watched in silence. The cruel laughter and the mocking words had vanished. The queen's presence had silenced them all. As the queen led Amina away from the auction, a small light sparked in the girl's heart. She had been told for so long that she was worthless, that she was too weak to survive. But here was a woman, a queen, who saw her as valuable and worthy of rescue. It was the first time Amina felt something close to hope. The queen didn't just bring Amina away from the auction block, she brought her into a new world. Instead of hiding Amina away like a secret, the queen introduced her to the people of her kingdom as a symbol of courage and resilience. She brought Amina to the capital city, where the streets were full of life, colors, and sounds, unlike anything the girl had ever known. The queen's palace was a place of light and warmth, filled with books, music, and people who cared deeply about helping others. Amina was enrolled in a special school created by the queen herself, an academy for girls who had been rescued from situations like hers. The teachers there were kind and patient. They taught Amina how to read and write, something she had never learned properly before. They helped her heal her body and mind, which had been broken by hunger, fear, and loss. For the first time, Amina was given time and space to just be a girl, to dream, to laugh, and to grow. But the queen's interest in Amina was deeper than just rescue and education. She saw in the girl a future leader, someone who could speak out against the terrible trade that had trapped so many others. The queen spent hours talking with Amina, listening to her story, and encouraging her to find her voice. She told Amina that her pain was not a weakness but a source of strength, that her experience could help change the world. With the queen's support, Amina began to speak publicly about what had happened to her. She told her story to crowds of people, to leaders, and to groups that worked to fight human trafficking. At first, her voice trembled and tears came easily, but over time she grew stronger. Her words carried the weight of truth and the power of hope. She became a symbol of resistance and change. The queen stood by Amina every step of the way, protecting her from those who wished to silence her. Together, they worked to build a network of people dedicated to rescuing others from the darkness of trafficking and slavery. Amina trained in leadership, public policy, and languages, preparing herself for the day she would lead the fight on a larger stage. The queen's arrival at that auction was not just a rescue, it was the beginning of a revolution. By choosing to bid on Amina, she sent a message to the world that no child was too fragile, no life too broken to be saved and given a second chance. The queen's courage gave Amina a chance to heal, to learn, and to become a beacon of hope for thousands of others trapped in similar pain. As the days turned to months and months into years, Amina transformed. From the fragile girl who had once stood silently on the auction block, she grew into a confident young woman. She wore her scars not as a shame, but as a reminder of her strength and the power of compassion. And always, the queen was there, not just as a protector, but as a mentor and friend. Their story spread far beyond the borders of the village and the capital. It reached other countries and inspired people to take action. More girls were rescued, more voices were heard, and the cruel trade that had once seemed unstoppable began to tremble under the weight of courage and justice. Amina knew that the journey was far from over. But with the queen's support and her own determination, she was ready to face whatever challenges came next. She was no longer just a fragile girl. She was a survivor, a leader, and a symbol of hope for a better future. After the queen rescued Amina from the cruel auction, the girl's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. But the journey was far from easy. It wasn't as simple as just being saved and living happily ever after. The past weighed heavily on her heart and mind. The memories of fear, hunger, and loss stayed with her like shadows that refused to fade. Every night when the palace grew quiet and the stars filled the sky, Amina would lie awake, her mind haunted by the faces of those she had left behind, her family, the friends she never saw again, and the many others trapped in darkness. The queen knew this pain was real, and she understood that healing would take time. She did not expect Amina to forget or to move on quickly. Instead, she offered her patience, kindness, and steady support. The palace became a place where Amina could begin to find peace, where she was surrounded not by fear but by people who cared. One of the Queen's first steps was to help Amina rebuild her health. The girl was so thin that her bones seemed almost visible beneath her skin. She was weak, tired, and often sick from the hardships she had endured. Doctors and nurses at the palace worked day and night, giving her nutritious food, clean water, and medicine. At first, Amina was reluctant to eat, her stomach still uneasy from months of hunger. But slowly, her body began to recover, and with it, her strength grew. Alongside the physical healing, the Queen placed great importance on education. She believed that knowledge was power, the key to freedom and change. Amina was enrolled in the Queen's Special Academy, a school dedicated to girls like her who had survived trafficking, abuse, and war. The teachers were patient and gentle, understanding the trauma their students carried with them. They taught Amina how to read and write, how to count, and even how to speak new languages. Each lesson was like a small victory, a building block toward a new life. At first, Amina found learning difficult. Her mind was clouded with sadness and fear. She sometimes struggled to concentrate, and there were days when she wanted to give up. But the Queen would visit often, sitting beside her, encouraging her, reminding her of the future she could build. "You are stronger than you know," the Queen would say. "Your story is not just about pain. It's about hope. And you have the power to change the world." Amina began to believe those words. Slowly but surely, she grew more confident. She made friends with other girls at the academy, girls who had faced horrors similar to hers but were determined to reclaim their lives. Together, they shared their stories, their fears, and their dreams. They supported each other, forming a sisterhood of strength and courage. Despite these positive changes, Amina's past was never far away. There were moments when nightmares woke her in the middle of the night. Moments when the memory of the auction, the shouting voices, and the cold hands gripping her arm came rushing back. Sometimes she felt trapped between two worlds, the dark past she wanted to forget and the bright future she hoped to create. One day, the Queen invited Amina to her private chambers. The room was filled with books, maps, and photos of people from all over the kingdom. The Queen sat across from Amina and spoke gently. "Your past does not define you," she said, "but it has shaped you in ways that give you a unique strength. I want you to use that strength to help others." The Queen explained that many girls and boys were still trapped in trafficking rings, enslaved and silenced. She wanted Amina to become a voice for those who had no one to speak for them. It was a heavy responsibility, but Amina felt ready. She wanted to make sure that no one else had to suffer as she did. With the Queen's guidance, Amina began training in public speaking and leadership. She learned how to share her story in a way that could inspire change. She practiced speaking in front of small groups, then larger audiences. At first, her voice shook, but each time she grew stronger. Her courage inspired those who listened, and her words carried a powerful message of hope and justice. The Queen also helped Amina understand the importance of building alliances. They met with government officials, human rights organizations, and other leaders who wanted to fight trafficking. Amina learned how to work with others, how to negotiate, and how to push for new laws to protect vulnerable children and women. During this time, Amina's relationship with the Queen grew deeper. The Queen was more than a protector. She was a mentor and a friend. She taught Amina about resilience, kindness, and the power of forgiveness. The Queen shared stories of her own struggles and triumphs, helping Amina see that even the strongest people face challenges. One of the hardest lessons for Amina was learning to forgive, not just those who had hurt her, but also herself. For years, she had carried a heavy burden of guilt and shame, blaming herself for the terrible things that had happened. But through the Queen's wisdom and the support of her friends, Amina began to understand that she was a survivor, not a victim. As Amina grew stronger, she started to travel beyond the palace walls. She visited schools, villages, and refugee camps, sharing her story and spreading awareness about human trafficking. Each place she went, she met people who had suffered, who had lost hope. Her words gave them courage. Her presence gave them strength. Amina's journey was not easy. She faced resistance from those who wanted to keep the trade hidden. She faced threats and intimidation. But she never gave up. The Queen stood by her side, providing protection and guidance. Together, they worked to create programs that rescued children from trafficking, provided shelter and education, and helped victims rebuild their lives. They trained law enforcement to recognize and stop traffickers. They raised funds to support survivors. Slowly, change began to take root. Throughout all this, Amina never forgot where she came from. She carried the memory of her village, her lost family, and the many children still waiting to be saved. Her heart remained full of compassion and determination. One day, the Queen asked Amina to visit the auction site again. It was a difficult moment for the girl who had once stood there broken and afraid, but this time she went with courage. The auction site was abandoned, silent, a place frozen in time. Amina walked through it, feeling the ghosts of the past, but also the promise of the future. She knelt on the dusty ground and whispered a prayer for those who had suffered there. She promised herself that she would continue to fight, to speak, and to save as many lives as she could. The Queen stood beside her, proud and silent. Amina's story spread far and wide, inspiring others to join the fight. She became a symbol of hope, a living proof that even the most fragile human could rise, could heal, and could change the world. And though the road ahead was long and full of challenges, Amina was ready. She had been given a second chance, and she would not waste it. With the Queen's support, her friends, and her own fierce spirit, she would keep fighting, for herself, for those still trapped in darkness, and for a future where no child would ever be sold like a fragile human again. The fight to end human trafficking was no easy journey for Amina and the Queen. Even after rescuing her from the auction block and after Amina had grown stronger, the path ahead was filled with dangers, challenges, and heartbreaks that neither of them had fully expected. Part 4 tells the story of how Amina and the Queen worked together, not only to save others but to change a whole system built on cruelty and silence. After Amina began sharing her story publicly, people from all walks of life started to pay attention. The Queen's powerful support meant that Amina's voice could reach far and wide, and with every speech, every visit to a school or village, more people became aware of the terrible reality of human trafficking. But awareness alone wasn't enough. The system that allowed trafficking to continue was deeply rooted. There were powerful people benefiting from it, rich men, corrupt officials, and criminals who wanted the trade to keep going. This made the fight very dangerous. Amina soon learned that speaking out came with risks. There were threats against her life and the lives of those who helped her. She sometimes woke up to find strangers watching her home, or she received letters filled with threats and warnings. The Queen was fiercely protective, arranging for security guards and secret routes to keep Amina safe. But the danger weighed heavily on the girl's heart. Despite this, Amina refused to give up. She knew the risks, but she also knew that silence would mean more children like her would suffer. Every day, she remembered the faces of the girls and boys still trapped, still waiting for a chance to be free. That thought gave her the strength to keep going. Together, the Queen and Amina began building a network, a group of brave individuals who were committed to fighting trafficking on many fronts. They worked with police officers, teaching them how to recognize trafficking victims and arrest traffickers. They trained social workers to care for survivors and provide them with safe places to live. They partnered with schools to educate children and families about the dangers of trafficking, so fewer would fall into its traps. One of the most important parts of their work was creating shelters and rehabilitation centers for rescued children. These centers were more than just safe houses. They were places of healing. Many children had been abused, starved, and forced to work in terrible conditions. Their minds were full of fear and confusion. The centers offered counseling, education, medical care, and most importantly, love and kindness. Amina often visited these centers, sitting with the children, holding their hands and telling them that they were not alone. She shared her story to show them that it was possible to survive, to heal, and to dream again. Her presence gave hope where there had been none. But changing hearts and minds was not the only battle. The Queen and Amina also worked hard to change the laws. They met with government officials and lawmakers, pushing for stricter penalties against traffickers and better protections for victims. This was a slow and frustrating process. Some officials were unwilling to help, either because they were corrupt or simply indifferent. Others were afraid to take on such a dangerous issue. Still, the Queen's influence and Amina's courage helped sway many important leaders. Laws began to change. New policies were introduced to identify and support victims better. Police forces received special training. More resources were allocated to fight trafficking. These victories were small but important steps toward a better future. Amina's personal journey was full of ups and downs. She struggled with the memories of her past, sometimes feeling overwhelmed by sadness or anger. At times, she wondered if she could carry the weight of so many lives on her shoulders. But the Queen reminded her that she was never alone, that together they were stronger than the forces trying to silence them. The Queen also taught Amina the importance of forgiveness. This was one of the hardest lessons for the girl who had suffered so much. Forgiving those who hurt her didn't mean forgetting or excusing what they did. It meant freeing herself from the chains of hate and bitterness. The Queen shared stories of her own life, times when she had faced betrayal and pain but chose compassion instead of revenge. This helped Amina find peace in her heart. One of the most powerful moments came when Amina returned to the village, where she had lived before being taken. It was a place still scarred by war and poverty, but it was also a place of hope and resilience. The people welcomed her with tears and hugs. Many had heard about the Queen and the brave girl who was fighting for justice. Amina visited the families, listened to their stories, and helped bring resources like food, clean water, and medicine. She spoke with the children, telling them they could build a future free from fear. The visit was both healing and heartbreaking. She saw the deep wounds left by conflict and trafficking, but also the strength of a community determined to rebuild. Throughout this time, Amina never forgot the Queen's lessons about leadership. She learned that being a leader wasn't about power or fame. It was about service, sacrifice, and standing up for those who could not stand for themselves. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to act with patience and wisdom. The Queen continued to support Amina's education, encouraging her to study law and human rights. The girl wanted to understand the systems that allowed trafficking to thrive so she could fight them more effectively. Her studies were difficult, but she was determined. She dreamed of one day helping to write laws that would protect every child, everywhere. As Amina grew into a young woman, her story inspired many. She became a symbol of hope and change, showing the world that even the most fragile humans could be strong enough to fight back. But her mission was far from over. Every day, new victims were still trapped, and new battles awaited. One day, the Queen and Amina received news of a massive trafficking ring operating across several countries. This ring was larger and more dangerous than any they had faced before. It had deep connections with powerful criminals and corrupt officials. The Queen and Amina knew that dismantling it would require all their courage and resources. They planned a secret operation with trusted allies, police, government agents, and activists. It was risky, and failure could mean death or imprisonment. But the Queen and Amina were ready. Their years of preparation, training, and alliance building had prepared them for this moment. The operation was intense and dangerous. There were moments when everything seemed lost, when betrayal threatened to destroy their plans. But their determination never faltered. Slowly, they exposed the traffickers, rescued dozens of victims, and brought many criminals to justice. This victory was not just about arrests and freed children. It was a signal to the world that trafficking would not be tolerated. It was a beacon of hope that inspired others to join the fight. Through it all, Amina grew stronger in her role as a leader and advocate. She continued to speak out, to support survivors, and to push for change. The Queen remained her guide, mentor, and closest friend, reminding her that true strength came from love and courage. Their story showed that even the darkest situations could be transformed by compassion and action. It proved that one person's courage, supported by others, could challenge the cruelest systems. Amina's journey from a fragile girl on an auction block to a powerful voice for justice became a legend. But for her, it was not about fame. It was about a promise to every child still trapped in darkness that someone was fighting for them. Together, Amina and the Queen continued to work, never resting, always pushing forward. They knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that every life saved, every law changed, every heart touched was a victory worth fighting for. And so, with hope in their hearts and courage in their souls, they kept moving forward, determined to change the world, one fragile human at a time. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and courage, Amina's journey reached a point she had once thought impossible. The girl who had been sold like an object, fragile and broken, had become a strong voice for change, a beacon of hope for thousands. But even as victories piled up, Amina and the Queen knew the battle was far from over. Part 5 reveals how Amina's story evolved from survival to lasting change, and how her life became intertwined with a movement that could change the world forever. In the beginning, the changes were small. Amina and the Queen had helped rescue many victims, pushed new laws through governments, and trained officers to fight trafficking. But lasting change required more than just laws and rescues. It needed a shift in the way people thought, how society viewed human trafficking, and how communities worked together to stop it. Amina understood this deeply. She remembered how, in her village, ignorance and silence had allowed traffickers to operate without fear. People didn't know what to watch for, and victims were often blamed or hidden away. Changing these attitudes was just as important as fighting traffickers themselves. With this in mind, Amina and the Queen began organizing large awareness campaigns. They worked with artists, musicians, and storytellers to spread the message far and wide. Songs were written about freedom, plays performed in town squares, and powerful films made showing the reality of trafficking and the hope of rescue. Amina's own story became the heart of many of these campaigns. She traveled to cities and villages, sharing her experience with honesty and bravery. She spoke to children, parents, teachers, and leaders. Her words moved people to tears and action. People who had never thought about trafficking before began to understand it was happening all around them, and that they could help stop it. One of the most memorable moments came when Amina visited a huge festival attended by thousands. She stood on a big stage, her voice strong and clear, telling her story. As she spoke, the crowd grew silent, hanging on every word. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Many came forward to ask how they could help. It was a powerful reminder that even one voice could inspire a crowd. The Queen watched proudly as Amina grew into a leader who could rally a movement. But she also reminded her that change took time. "Don't be discouraged if progress feels slow," the Queen told her. "True change is like planting a tree. It takes years of care before it bears fruit." Despite the hope and progress, Amina faced personal challenges. The memories of her past still visited her in dreams, and some days, the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But she learned to lean on those who loved her, the Queen, her friends from the academy, and the survivors she helped. Together they formed a family bound by shared purpose and love. One of Amina's greatest gifts was her ability to forgive. This did not mean forgetting the cruelty she had suffered, but rather freeing herself from the chains of hatred and bitterness. Forgiveness gave her peace, and that peace made her a stronger leader. She encouraged others to find forgiveness too, helping survivors heal from their trauma. Meanwhile, the Queen continued her work behind the scenes. She used her influence to push for international cooperation against trafficking. It became clear that the problem crossed borders, and that countries needed to work together. Through her diplomacy and tireless efforts, treaties were signed, and joint task forces were created to catch traffickers operating in multiple countries. Amina was often part of these meetings, giving a voice to survivors and reminding officials that their decisions affected real lives. She insisted on survivor-centered policies, making sure that rescued children received the care they needed, rather than being punished or ignored. As the years passed, Amina's impact grew beyond anything she had imagined. She helped create a global network of survivors, advocates, and officials working side by side. They shared knowledge, strategies, and support. This network was a lifeline for those still trapped and a powerful force against traffickers. One of the most touching moments in Amina's journey came when she was invited to the United Nations to speak before world leaders. Standing in front of a crowd of diplomats and representatives from many countries, she told her story with courage and hope. She called for more action, more funding, and more compassion. Her speech was broadcast around the world. It moved many people to tears and inspired new commitments to fight trafficking. For Amina, it was a dream come true, a chance to turn her pain into a force for global change. But Amina never forgot the Queen's lesson that leadership was about service. Despite her growing fame, she remained humble and grounded. She visited survivors in shelters, comforted children who were afraid, and worked tirelessly to improve programs for education and rehabilitation. The Queen, growing older, began preparing Amina to take on even more responsibility. She saw in Amina not just a survivor but a true leader, someone who could carry their mission forward long after she was gone. Together, they planned ways to expand their work, reaching even the most remote and vulnerable communities. One day, the Queen and Amina traveled back to Amina's old village. It was a bittersweet moment. The village had changed, but scars remained. They visited the homes of families affected by trafficking and conflict. Amina helped bring resources to build schools and clinics. She spoke with local leaders about prevention and support. At the village center, a new community center was dedicated in honor of the Queen's support and Amina's courage. It was a place where children could learn, play, and dream, a symbol of hope rising from pain. The journey had come full circle. The fragile girl who once stood alone on the auction block was now a leader who had saved countless lives and changed laws. Her courage had sparked a movement that was growing stronger every day. But Amina knew there was still work to do. Trafficking was a problem rooted in poverty, inequality, and injustice. Ending it required addressing these deeper issues. She dedicated herself to promoting education, women's rights, and economic opportunities, believing that empowering communities was the best way to protect children. Her story inspired many to take action. Schools taught children about their rights. Communities formed watch groups. Governments funded prevention programs. The world was waking up. In quiet moments, Amina reflected on her journey. The pain, the fear, the loss had shaped her. But they did not define her. She had chosen hope, courage, and love. She had chosen to fight so others could live free. And though the Queen's presence would one day be gone, Amina knew their legacy would live on. In every life saved, every law passed, every heart changed. Her mission had become greater than herself. It was a call to all humanity, to see the fragile not as weak but as worthy of love and protection, to stand together against cruelty, to build a world where no child would ever be sold again. Amina's story was proof that even in the darkest places light can shine, that one person's courage can inspire a movement, that hope, no matter how fragile, is powerful enough to change the world. And so, with determination burning in her heart, Amina continued her work, never forgetting the little girl she once was and the Queen who believed in her. Together they had changed everything, and the future was full of promise.